Welcome to an all-new edition of Fanlight Zone Presents. My name is Ken M. You know me as the host of the ODPH podcast. I'm also the editor-in-chief here at Fanlight Zone. To my left, your right at home, he is the featured editor here of our comics division, and you know him as the host of 607 TWS, the wrestling show. Please give a warm welcome to Rich.
That's right. I am exhausted, but I am super excited because we get to talk to two of my favorite creators about an awesome project that's coming down the pipe. But Ken, you're going to tell us all about that here in a second.
Yes, I can, because you can tell with my animation, I'm super excited, and I usually mess up the intro when the book is this good, and that is what we're doing here, folks, because September 29th, a crowdfunding campaign is kicking off. You can't afford to miss, starring an immortal warrior that we know from pop culture, but now is going into a supernatural realm of redemption. This is a story you don't want to miss, but then again, if you know PCB Entertainment, you know they're always bringing some heat, and the Year of the Devil is going to be one you want to make sure, starring the one and only Danny Trejo. But we're fortunate enough to have the writers on the line with us to talk about this, but you know their work from Call of Duty, Spider-Man, Ascent, and Frost Road, and the newly released Marcus Walker, Kingslayer Protocol. We are super excited to talk to him because Year of the Devil is going to go right up there in the collection. So please give a welcome to Keith AREM and Chris Yates. Guys, what is going on?
Hey, up, thank you for having us.
That was a very warm welcome. Thank you.
That was very warm.
Thank you. What can I say? When we get excited to talk about these books, you know, we try making sure it's as welcome as possible. And this crowdfunding campaign is one fans don't want to miss. But obviously, tie in Danny Trejo into the comics world. How the heck did this whole story come to be?
That it's a story in the making for sure. Danny and I personally go back in the video game space. I've been directing games for quite some time, and Danny and I started working right around the time we were doing Call of Duty Zombies, and he was getting involved. And Danny started to come over here for some of his sessions on some other projects, and we just got along so well as a director and as an actor. It was just a natural bond. And I was working on the last Yakuza Like a Dragon game, and I just wrapped up The Exiled with Wesley Snipes, and the book had done really, really well, sold out on Diamond, and was doing super, super well. And Danny was in mid-session, and he's looking over the book, and he's like, I want to do a book with you. And it was just so funny just because he just literally like stopped himself mid-take, and he was like, I want to do a comic book. And Danny's got such an amazing just personal history, both you know, his life after prison and getting into Hollywood, but also his family heritage and where he came from. And so we started talking about like, where would this sit? And it just naturally came out of that conversation. And then as Chris and I had connected a few years back working on both of our projects, and we got Frost Road and Carnival, and, you know, we were kind of building PCB as its own studio. And as we were working on this, and his book, you know, for Marcus Walker is just phenomenal. And I was like, you're a writer. You're not just helping direct all the special projects for PCB, but you're a writer and a creator. So why don't you kind of join forces with me on this project that I'm doing with Danny? And just, I think we're so entrepreneurial in the way that we wanted to go out and do this. It wasn't like bringing this to a traditional publisher. This is something we wanted to do ourselves. Danny's incredibly entrepreneurial, and if you know his businesses. And so that was the beginning of it. And it just has snowballed. And we just, you know, gave everyone a sneak peek at Comic-Con this year. And that was our first validation of like, are people going to like this? And it just blew up. And so here we are, and we're on the roller coaster.
Yeah, I was going to say the temp in the room coming out of San Diego has to be high, because, you know, we were getting hit up on social media about this book. So this is, and granted, we weren't even at the event, but that's the buzz that was coming out of this too, especially with Danny coming into comics.
Yeah, absolutely. So now that we know how it came about, it's now time for the world famous elevator pitch. Mind you, I've always told people you do not have to like keep it short and concise. You can pretend you're on the Empire State Building elevator system. However, what is the elevator pitch for Year of the Devil?
Hey, Chris, you could start this one, and I'll jump in afterwards. I always do that.
Basically, think of it as Conan meets Machete, or Conan meets Machete and Berserk. We basically wanted to be this kind of swashbuckling adventure of a conquistador who gets in a entanglement or a fight with the devil across centuries, and how we get there is which just unfolds throughout the graphic novel itself. So basically, that's the very quick kind of, you know, Spark Notes version. And then the bigger one is essentially this conquistador finds himself, you know, on the eve of this massacre that's going to happen, and he falls in love with the princess, and he basically says, hey, this is coming, you need to leave, and I'll leave with you, but, you know, like, this death is coming for you and your people. And she unfortunately says, no, I can't leave them. And, you know, not to spoil it, but, you know, she eventually loses her life to that battle, or, you know, we don't know what happens to her. And so he becomes enraged, and, you know, he kind of seeks revenge and finds himself in Chichen Itza, in Mexico, in Chichen Itza, and looks around, hears this voice, and he's telling him these riddles. And basically he's like, I'll let you know what happened to your love, but you have to kind of come find me and come free me. And so he looks around and goes and sees a sinkhole of this man. And this man basically is the one saying, free me and I will let you know what happened. And so he was kind of trepidatious, doesn't really know. And so he says, all right, and starts to unleash him. But then he was tricked, because it was actually the devil himself, and all these kind of spirits and demons come out of this cage. And, you know, he laughs and says, you know, you've made a mistake. You've unleashed the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And then, you know, Diego has to realize, like, what the hell did I just do? And then Keith, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, the best part is that, you know, we set this up where you've got this fallen conquistador who's lost the love of his life. He's now been tricked, and he realizes he's just about to have freed the devil. And the devil taunts him. He says, you know, it doesn't matter. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse have been unleashed. And somehow the Mayans have found a way to imprison this guy in this cage. But he grabs Diego and pulls him into the bars, into one of the spears, and kills our main character right at the beginning. So on our first issue, we kill Diego. But because he has what we call this Rosetta bond with the devil, he's sort of destined, because he wants to just nothing more to be with Itzel, the princess from the Aztec elite that he is in love with. But she keeps calling to him saying, you have a mission that you have to finish. And very much in the gladiator sense of, you know, this warrior that just wants to come home. And so he's now destined, because he's tied to the devil in this Rosetta bond, that every 150 years he keeps coming back to defeat and dispatch one of the different 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And so that's kind of our setup. And that happens, you know, just our first 25 to 30 pages is where that's at. And this is, so it's a romp through time. And the nice thing is that all the events that we're based on are actual historical events. We go all over the world, different cultures throughout to modern day. And it really is, in some respects, we always joke about this. It's kind of like Danny's origin story, because he really does have, you know, family that went back to the conquistadors, but we, you know, address his tattoos and sort of, you know, Danny. So as this immortal swashbuckling Conan, it really very much is, you know, him, like we said, with Machete kind of mixed in.
And Danny's favorite subject in school was history. And so this was Danny's love. He wanted to see that kind of seen through in a way that, you know, celebrated, you know, Latino heritage throughout history in a fun kind of wink and a nod at the same way, but, you know, still taking it very seriously, but having fun, if that makes sense. So.
No, absolutely makes sense. And I'm sold on this. Like, this sounds just incredible. And especially getting Danny involved. And Keith, you've had the pleasure of working with other celebrities like Wesley Snipes, Keith David, just to name a few. How would you describe Danny's creative process? If there's any difference between those other actors, like focusing on comics?
It's really interesting, because each actor has their own history of how they got into their career. And Danny started his career later in life, right? So it wasn't like acting was his first thing. He fell into it very much by accident. He was actually on set, and a director saw him and brought him in as a consultant, and someone who actually ended up becoming, you know, this world famous star, just because of the way he brought a real persona. So when he's creatively collaborating, he's bringing himself, his heritage, his history, and his feelings, but he's also bringing this trust of the director and the writers, because he knows that that's their craft. And he talks about this a lot when people are talking about how do you get into the business. And he's like, you know, it's good to have an idea, and it's very unique for someone like myself, because I come from video games. It's very much a collaborative space. We all are, you know, directors and creators in our own right, and we all come together in this mass hive of things. Whereas a film is more singular, where you have a director, they have a vision, and all departments funnel to the director. And that doesn't usually happen in video games. So when you have a lot of creatives coming together in a project like this, including, you know, myself and Chris and Danny and our art team, we've really embraced this collaborative spirit. So when Danny has an idea, he's usually like hesitant because he's been working with film directors who have a very singular focus, and he's like trained to be like, hey, you know, keep your ideas to yourself, do the work that's there, and he's always made a great career out of this. And so I think he was a little trepidatious to kind of start to say, well, I have some ideas. And there's a funny quote. If you've seen any of our trailers, there's a quote in there that says, anything that doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And that's a really personal quote from him, because there's a guy named Eddie Bunker that was a mentor to him. And that was the thing that always he learned coming out of prison, and then, you know, becoming the celebrity that he is. And so we really wanted to embrace as much as Danny's heritage, the story behind his tattoos, which are very personal, and his family heritage in Mexico. How do we incorporate that? And so all the times that Chris and I, we get to have dinner with him and just chat with him about ideas, we keep adding more and more to Danny's heritage and his story through this book. So, and it's very organic, and it's been a great experience, I think, not just for us, but for Danny as well.
Speaking of collaborations, Chris, you just came off of the successful crowdfunding. Of course, we'll plug it one more time, of Marcus Walker, Kingslayer Protocol. Make sure you sign up for issue 2. I think it's my job now to kind of make you blush about it. Great book, by the way. So make sure if you didn't get issue 1, you get issue 2, and you continue to get them after that. But anyways, doing that and having that out there for you solo, coming into this, doing the collaboration, working with a couple other writers on this, it was obviously new to you. How did you handle the process, and what did you think you took away from it?
Well, I just want to make sure I hold my own. Like, obviously, Keith is an enormously successful creator in his own right, and then Danny is Danny Trejo. You know what I mean? Like, I just kind of have to laugh at it to be like, why? Like, one of these is not like the other. You know what I mean? I'm just like, all right, here I am. I mean, I'm very grateful that they offered me to come in and join and be a part of the team. So, you know, I very much wanted it to be, I'll say for myself specifically, coming in as kind of maybe the newer creator or the newer writer, I just very much wanted it to be about Danny's vision and very much what he wanted to see. Like, one of the things was he really wanted Latino artists to be a part of this book in any way, shape, or form. Because, you know, we have a lot of wonderful artists, but specifically he really wanted to have Latino artists. And so what we thought could be a really unique way was that all of our covers are done by Latino artists. So just to kind of, one of the, we got announced at San Diego Comic-Con was Dan Quintana. We have Raymond Gay. We have Jay Gonzo, Jonathan Uribe, Carlo Barberi, Vanessa Del Rey, and then I'm always Willie Roberts and Jaime Carrillo. And so we have all these wonderful Latino artists who are contributing, and we're, you know, trying to celebrate them and Danny. And so that was really important to us. And so I made sure that was a thing that we never lost sight of, because it's, representation matters, and it really matters to Danny. And so as a first-time creator, being additive and supportive to, you know, Keith and Danny's vision, what they want to execute it, but also on the back end, making sure we never lost sight of like the whole picture itself and how we kind of present it to the people.
And that's actually continuing into the rest of the production too, because we see this, even though this is going to be like a 160-page graphic novel with 5 different issues that will follow the kind of journey of him through the ages. We don't want the story to end there, and it's not a cash grab. It's not something that we're like, oh, we just have to sequel it because it's going to do, you know, be successful. It's more that there's so many stories that we want to tell and explore that there's just no way it would do a disservice to this story if we try to make them all work. And so, as Chris and I have been talking about these ideas that we want to incorporate, we realize that there's so much more to this world that we're creating. And we were talking not only 500 years of history, but we're talking mythology and religion and Aztec religion and Western mythology and ideas of the devil and the 4 horsemen. There's so much to explore, plus Hispanic culture and a lot of the Latino representation that we wanted is also in the stories. And you'll see some of the covers that go back to historical things that that people in South America and Aztec history and Mexican history is super important, not just to Danny, but I think to a lot of the audience really wanted to see that represented there. So we're finding that as creators, we're able to expand this world and grow with our audience. And one of the reasons why we're doing this as a backer kit, and we're doing this as a crowdfunded campaign, is that we're not there to ask for money for them to pay for the campaign. It's sort of like we're trying to build our community. We're trying to find people that love Danny, that love horror, that love the mythology, they love the space of what we are. The fact that we're independent is just kind of changing the gatekeepers and allowing us to get connecting, like what we're doing today is connect right with our audience and the people that we want to work with. But I think that also gives us a connection to our fans. And, when we're at Comic-Con, they're telling us what they love. They love parts of the story. We see how it resonates. And, we'll have a panel, and our panel at Comic-Con was insane because there was a 2-hour wait to still get in, and there was 1,500 people in the hall who couldn't even get into our panel. And we're like, that's the love of Danny. And, not even knowing what the story was, there's such a celebration of our audience. And so that's what we're enjoying about this sort of process, is that we're able to kind of test it in real time and grow with the audience and expand it out. And that's where the story has been taking us.
And that's incredible too. Just have that reaction just coming out of the gate too, especially not even diving into the story, Diego. But as you have been, obviously crafting the story for both of you, Diego is a very complex lead. What do you think is his most notable trait as we know going into this story?
Probably that he's a man of few words and repressed emotions. And that's a challenging character to work with, because when you get somebody that has that machismo or something that has that sort of distance, you want to find a way to emotionally connect that person to the audience and to the people around them. And so he's balanced by this princess of Itzel, because she is the opposite of that. She is a flower. She's a natural flower. Her name means flower. And there's a lot of indications when you start to see some of the, I would say, misdirection in our script. There's a lot of twists and turns that we really like in the story. And she needs to pull that emotion out of him, this redemption arc of who he is and why he's on this mission and how someone like that expresses his love. And when you're working in a medium of comic books, regardless of the fact that this might have a likeness of Danny or a younger version of Danny as he gets reincarnated each 150 years and a kind of a renewable version of him, his personality has to evolve over that. And we have to discover through his eyes. And I think as a video game creator, as a player, I can just tell you this, as both a director and a player, that we need to identify with the characters that we're controlling. We want some agency in the game because that's our journey. And we're sort of going through the eyes of our character. So if you have a character that's speaking for you or doing actions that don't represent how you feel, there's a disconnect between the character and the player. And so Diego is a really interesting opportunity for us as writers, because he is a man of few words, but strong emotions. And obviously we're through Diego's eyes and following his journey, but there's so much misdirection of people that are manipulating him over time, and the idea of the horseman and what the devil is. And there's a lot of indications. We've done some interviews already, and people kind of think they know what the story is. And we've talked about the story. And I think what people don't realize is we've come up with the end of the story before we came up with the beginning of the story. And it's very satisfying to have an ending that we know is going to rock people, and knowing that where Danny's journey is going to go and where Diego's character is going to be. And so it's kind of a fun journey for us right now, because we're so excited for this story, if you can't tell already, that we really want people to enjoy this, because they're going to learn so much about the mythology and the history. But a character like this, we're going to go through his eyes. And so I think that's why, going back to your original question, writing a character like this is an interesting challenge, but it also seats back to our history as creators.
All the stuff that you're packing in sounds like just incredible, just from the story aspect. Now let's talk about the art for a little bit. Frank Mazzoli is handling the interiors for the story. What made Frank the perfect choice for this project?
Just from his directing choices and his styles and how he kind of does the action. Also, Frank's done other kind of high-level celebrity profile jobs before, so we know he could handle kind of, making sure the likeness is well done and just the action and kind of, being an active collaborator in that regard. So with Frank, we basically said, hey, we kind of want this, dirt under the fingernails, grindhouse, Conan-esque, swashbuckling adventure. And Frank pretty much got it right away. We had some back and forth just on some things, but he just seemed like the only guy we really wanted because of his love for Danny and all the things that Danny brings with it. So it was kind of a no-brainer in our regard.
And I think that's where the other artists started to complement that as well, because we wanted to surround Danny with all these amazing Latino artists. And someone like Raymond Gay was talking to us about stuff that he grew up with in Mexico and in other areas, where there was a famous painting of this Aztec warrior holding a dead Aztec princess, and he's holding her on the steps of this Aztec temple. And the traditional picture, if you see it, he's got the headdress, and he's got just amazing sort of like the way he's portrayed, and she is. And it's this tragic story. It's like this Romeo and Juliet story about a princess that was never supposed to be involved with him, and he was sent away to war, and then she's told that he has died in war, and she withers and dies, and he comes back and finds her, and that's that classic pose. And Raymond's like, everyone in Mexico, everyone in South America grew up with this old Aztec painting, and you see it everywhere. And he said, I want to paint Danny like that, because he's in love with Itzel, and he has this love of the princess, and it's very much in that same ethos. And it's great to see them side by side. And so I think culturally, a lot of our artists wanted to take that representation back into the story and saying, you guys are basing this stuff in history. Why don't we culturally bring that back and represent that in the story? And that's what I love about how this art flows between all the different artists that are involved in the project.
I mean, you have tremendous artists as part of this, like tremendous, like that's just, I think I think that you can't overstate that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the artists that are doing the covers for this alone, like it's an all-star lineup. So, I mean, fans definitely have a lot to gravitate towards. And then going into the story, I know we're obviously not going to talk about any spoilers, but is there a character that, other than Diego, that when you started going into the story really surprised you in the direction they went in?
We have a character named Death, if his name doesn't spoil anything. And we tease him at the beginning. If anyone has seen the ash cans, he is this witness, right? Because everyone's going to pass through death. Doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on, you're still coming his way. And so he's this character that is constantly this observer that is throughout our story, that doesn't have a set agenda the way the devil would or other people would. And he is there for the ride because he's fascinated by someone like Diego, because Diego is clearly not seeing the signs of how he's being played and what's happening. And yet he's fascinated and wants to go along for it. And I think his character is going to continue to evolve. And Chris, maybe you can kind of elaborate on that. But for me, he was like the character that I feel is going to have the most longevity, obviously outside of Diego.
And to that point, not to pivot, but I had an idea, and Keith, you can tell me what you think. The locations and centuries we chose, because where certain horsemen and where we're placing them throughout history is a resemblance of the time in actual history. And so to put Diego with a said horseman in a certain century and location gives it a different flavor, a different look, a different feel, if you will. Like, we're hoping to convey a certain sense of like, it's a desert or a heat of something, or that it's done in this snowy mountain type area, or something to that effect of like, you just wouldn't see that character in that location fighting that type of creature or monster or horseman rather. And we kind of had a fun way of pairing that with, history. And so to kind of say, yeah, death is great, but I personally would have to say the location in itself, just to be like, I never thought of putting him there. And that itself is what brings more fun and unique kind of twists and turns, as Keith put it earlier.
And there's one other aspect of it that I'll cheat a little bit, is that we have a lot of misdirection in the script because we're with Diego and we're through his vantage point, like I was mentioning earlier. Mm-hmm. So what Diego sees is what the audience sees, and that's what he wants to see. And if you know your mythology and you kind of know what we're setting things up, there's a lot of misdirection just from the beginning of why he set up this idea that he has to stop the horsemen to stop the apocalypse, right? That the devil has somehow unleashed. But what Diego sees and how he sees the horsemen is different. Like, they might see, the world might see a guy on a horseback, but he might see a minotaur. He might see a creature that is there. So we're already starting to set up a little bit of Diego's vantage point that might not be a trustworthy sort of narrator for us. And that's not to say that he's hallucinating or saying things that it's not true. It's just that our character is definitely on a mission. And when that mission is very singular and focused, but it's a much broader world, that gives us a lot of opportunities to kind of play with these characters. And so to Chris's point, a lot of the environment and the world plays a significant character in itself.
Listen, I'm a big history fan, so it got me there, but I'm also a huge horror fan. And of course, this is a supernatural horror book at the end of the day. Uh, Listen, doing it through crowdfunding is a lot more freeing, as we know, because there's not as many notes from somebody what to do or not to do. But was there any ideas that any of you came up with that you were like, oh, we should probably hold back on that? Or was it just, foot to the ground, let's go?
I mean, I'll go in and just say, I think, as Keith said earlier, we just had too many ideas, and obviously we have to refine them, but it's like we are just having so much fun with it, because that's like, again, celebrating Danny is the main takeaway, but if there's always a second one in comics, it's having fun with it and making sure that people are experiencing something new and unique. And so I think it's just putting him in those positions where it's like, I never saw him do that thing, or I never saw him in that type of situation or fight said thing. And so for me personally, I just think, how crazy, how fun, how unique can we try and make this, and maybe do something a little bit different, or at least that's the hope in the try. I mean, I don't want to speak for Keith, but at least that's for me, of just how crazy we can be, because there's no budget for comics, as we know. So it's just like, it can be splatter, it can be gore, it could be violence, and there's plenty of it. It's just a matter of how far do you go. And as of right now, we haven't really found it because we're having too much fun, if that's
Well, and also we play on a lot of our heritage and history. I mean, I directed SmackDown versus Raw for 7 years with THQ before we went under, and I was on tour with all the wrestlers for years. And if you've seen our panel and stuff like that, AJ Mendez and AJ Lee is part of our crew now, and has a great heritage in the world of wrestling. And I also directed Saints Row and at 3 and 3.5, and we have some very colorful wrestling characters and going into the lucha libre areas. And obviously that's stuff that wouldn't make sense for a horror supernatural kind of thing that we've started with, because it's just, I think that's where we jumped the shark. I think that's the point where we finally get to the point where if we did that, it wouldn't be cohesive as a story. But we also love stuff like that. And I think there's stuff in Mexican culture and all over the world where we'd love to incorporate some of our characters. So I think that's where we're looking, is once we're done with this campaign, we have so many collaborators we're working with that's going to be the expansion that you're going to see, is we're going to start to get into all sorts of other time eras and other stories and collaborations with other writers and other artists to kind of expand out what we're doing.
Listen, as somebody who's a huge wrestling fan as well, there is a long history of the luchadors in horror stories in Mexico.
Yeah.
Like, there's some great, some people would argue they're not great. I would say that they're great.
They are
movies.
great. Yes.
Well, I mean, Hellboy, Mexico, right?
Oh yeah. But you also have, back you would have like Blue Demon versus Frankenstein, or El Santo versus the Wolfman. And they're what they are, but they're amazing movies to me, because hey, it takes two things I love and puts them together. So hey, listen, if the more that you can pack into that, the more you're taking more and more of my money, the more my wife is once again going to cut off my crowdfunding credit cards. Eventually, we're pushing the limits.
Yes,
we're pushing the limits, folks.
We won't rat you out. We'll keep it safe. Safe.
Yeah. You're in a safe spot here with all our listeners. Nobody's going to rat you out. But as long as you get to sign up for Year of the Devil first, then you're okay. Anything after that,
as long as she doesn't cut me off before. So
yes.
we'll be very careful beforehand.
Yes, indeed. Now, obviously, horror is really booming right now in comics. And for both of you, what is the biggest appeal for you writing in the horror genre?
I have always been in the genre space for everything from horror and sci-fi and fantasy, and all of my projects are there. But horror is really interesting because on the film side or on the video game side, you're playing with timing, with misdirection, with your camera, all these different things that you work with to evoke that sense of dread, right? And it's interesting because even go back to early Resident Evil, where, if you had a traditional 2D game and you've got a zombie or something that's going to attack you and you can see them side scrolling, there's no scare in that. But the moment you move the camera into a third person perspective, now you can't see what's behind that wall, and when that zombie jumps out, that's a jump scare, right? But I think when you're talking about traditional horror, there's psychological horror, there's mythological horror, and all the psychological side of things that you can play with. And when you're talking about a comic where you're progressing through the story by turning the page, you don't have the convenience of turning out the lights or taking out the sound or bringing up the music or doing so. You don't have the jump scare. You don't have any of those things. So the horror has to rely on the psychological sort of not just the implications of it, but also just sort of like the aesthetic of where you're going. If you watch Backrooms, there's a few jump scares, but it's more so that the feeling of dread and what you're going through really makes it into the horror space. And I think when we're dealing with a book like this, where you got mythology and all of the historical sides, the horror really comes in the fact that it's brutal and it's gruesome, and you're not just fighting the devil and the horseman, but like the implications of what that does. So it can sure you can have gore and blood all day long, but I think the horror has to really affect you on a psychological level.
I think for me, it's the mirror. It's the places you don't want to explore within yourself or the other. You know what I mean? Of like, what does Diego see? Like, would he turn into this monster? You know, like of all this thing, like what really scares you? Is it losing a loved one? Is it losing a child? Is it losing yourself? And so I think for Diego, what he could become because of what he had lost scares him, I feel, or at least that's how I have that mindset. And so I think for horror, it's just you can explore in comics right now and why it's such a boom. You can explore all those things that you're really uncomfortable with, whether it be, you know, political or, you know, religious or, you know, whatever it be, you know, it's up to you to decide what scares you. And if you can face those fears at your own pace, so to speak, because, you know, you have the paper and all, I think that's why it really resonates with people, is because you kind of see who that makes you. Cause it's like, what are you scared of? And you can at least explore that in this medium. And I feel like with us and Diego, it's like, all right, dude, you have been this conquistador and you've done battles and wars, but now you're thrown into the situation. Who do you become? You know, what scares him?
But we don't shy away from the gore. And so the one thing is we can get away with, you know, because we're in the horror space, is it is pretty bloody and disgusting. It really gets there. And we don't want to make it gore or for the sake of gore. You know, it has to service the story, but we do kind of go there. And if you see even the ash can, it gets pretty disgusting and it's still in black and white. But once it gets colored in, it's going to be pretty god awful.
Listen, going back though to that, you know, the intellectual portion of it that you were talking about, Keith, I will say this, because I got the shameless plug for Chris earlier. If you haven't read Frost Road, which Keith did, super tremendous. Like you go through the pages and like you said, you can't really do jump scares in a comic. It's hard, but you can change things up. You can make reveals. You can make people second guess. And in Frost Road did a fantastic job there. So I'm assuming that, you know, that trend will continue here.
Yeah, Frost was a great journey because we had to evoke horror and this sense of dread with something that ultimately is coming through sound and waves, right? And how do you convey that in a book by nature has no sound or any way to deliver that? And so that very much is a character in the story, because I was writing it as a screenplay for a film I was going to direct, but our boards were so compelling. And as we were doing this, we're like, the pacing and that constant question of what's going to happen and what's around the next corner and where is this leading, and the waves are leading you there. That was a really good lesson in you know, developing a story, and it really resonated for people on the horror side because you did get that sense of dread, you know, just by turning the page.
Absolutely. I thought it was fantastic. And it still has a prominent spot. Like sometimes it actually has a prominent spot on my coffee table, which is kind of funny because like, you know, you put it out. I've always said it, the art in that book is just worth flipping through. And so it's a great conversation starter, just to throw that out there as well. But the indie realm, we love indie comics. We love everything about them. You know, obviously, no hate on the big two as well. But the indie world is booming. You know, and as we go into this market, as you go in here, and we're doing crowdfunding here for this book. And both of you have made other crowdfunded books. Both of you have been involved in the indie market as far as comics has been concerned. What are you guys looking at this in the state of 2026? How do you look at the indie market and how open is it?
I mean, for me, I kind of have a very unique position, specifically with, not only what I do with PCB and with Keith, but also with Prana I work with, who does crowdfunding, and also they are the parent company to Comics the Magazine. So we get like direct reports about anything and everything when it comes to comics. So specifically with the indies, is like I think people will have something to say, and they're just trying to take ownership of that. Like, well, if Diamond is collapsing, they want to do it themselves, or they're getting so frustrated by the gatekeeping, they're like, screw it, I'll figure it out. Whether it's sending a package without a cardboard thing to make sure it doesn't get folded, or understanding how to do print or color or all those things. I think people would rather try and mess up than to not have tried at all at the end of the day, so they don't want to have that regret. So, plus with the internet and, obviously Instagram and TikTok, like finding people and artists to collaborate with is, it's so easy. You can literally say, hey, I like this person, and I'm going to reach out to them. Granted, they might be busy, or they might have other plans, or they might have, agents or managers. But at the same time, it's like asking has never been easier in that regard. So I think that's why indie comics is booming, is people are just taking it, doing it by the bootstraps, so to speak, and just being like, I'm going to do it, whether come hell or high water. And here now it's a resurgence of indie that is being seen throughout BackerKit and Kickstarter and all the other platforms.
And I think as a creator, you realize that distribution is really the gatekeeper that is keeping you from doing what you want to do. And it's really broken. It has been, because the way retail has worked, the way that solicitation has worked over the years, Diamond was evidence of that. And when I did my first book with Image 20 years ago, we sold out right away. And then like that was it, they were done. And we're like, well, why don't we just keep printing? The book's gone, keep going. They're like, oh, well, we have to resolicit, we have to go back, we got to go back to previews. We were on the front cover of previews, and it was such an honor. And then the book sold out, and they're like, great, we got our money, we're good. And like, no, you keep going, you have a franchise that's taking off. So I think as a creator, you now have the ability that you don't want to be the salesperson. That's the one thing you don't want to do, but you're going to your community to say, you have a chance to join our community and affect our story. We can get you what you want. And now the barriers for distribution have changed. And that's where it's really changing. You're seeing this in trading cards. You're seeing this in comics. You're seeing this tabletop. You're seeing this in this indie spirit that's happening. And I think a lot of people are still unfamiliar outside of traditional channels of how crowdfunding works. They see BackerKit, they see Kickstarters, and they're like, well, how does this work? And it's less of a question now is it going to fund? It's more, I think now you're pre-ordering your favorite stuff and you're getting early access to something you're not going to see in stores, or you're not going to see that version of it in stores. So like you were saying earlier, if like that's a coffee table book or that's something you want to share, you're going to see that through a crowdfunded, campaign with us, because we're going to put in all of the effort to make sure that the packaging is right, that the design is right. You're getting all these extra features that we really see as fans ourselves. And then for mass production and distribution to retail, we can hand that off to a larger distributor. But for us, we just want to be able to get to our audience first.
I think it's the experience, as Keith said. People want a more curated experience. They want to feel like somebody built it with their blood, sweat, and tears. With AI, with all this stuff. Again, no shame to everyone has their own thoughts and opinions. But instead of it being content, they want to feel experiences. They want it to be an extension. They want to feel that this is a project from Danny. They want to feel like it's a certain thing that they're going to feel, whether it's going to a donut shop for Danny specifically, or a taco shop. They want to go to his BackerKit and hopefully feel that experience that this is authentically Danny. And so
they discovered it.
Exactly. It's like, imagine when you, back in the day, when you'd find a vinyl and you feel that experience of the gatefold and all that stuff. Now you have this whole new world you're a part of. People want that again. They wanted to go into a Kickstarter, which is now this digital comic shop of sorts. And instead of it being like, hey, fund this, give us your money and we'll make it. It's like, to some people, it's like, hey, we are going to make this and we want you to have this type of experience. I think that's another kind of point to that idea.
And that was why we went with BackerKit, actually, because at the time when we had just finished up Frost and Carnival of Souls, Kickstarter was going through some transitional changes through management and other things. And we had gotten great love from them. I mean, we were a project that we love. We were on the front page. They did mailings. They did all sorts of stuff. And suddenly there was a change in management and we didn't have the same context. And there was that period of time where they were changing that. And BackerKit approached us and they saw what we did with their campaigns. And they were like, hey, like, these are the tools we have. We're all about community. We're trying to help you, give you the tools as a creator to connect to that community. So as you see the campaign, I mean, we're not even starting until the end of September with our campaign. And for the past 3-4 months, we've already got up our pages. We're doing a thing called the launch party page where we're putting up content. And every week we're going to be putting up stuff for our fans. We're tying in all of our social media, everything that we want to do with Danny and his fans and our music fans and our horror fans and our comic fans, everyone, we want to give them a destination. So when we created the yearofthedevil.com, even BackerKit was like, direct that to your campaign. Don't try to separate all your audience. Have them all go to your community and put them in one place. And so you're seeing this concerted effort. And for us as creators, it's really interesting to learn about how we market ourselves, because we don't want to be salespeople. We are not there to go and pitch something like we're just trying to sell it, but we are trying to find our community. And that's the challenge. When you're really passionate about something, you want just to share that with them without having to say, oh, but it comes with this price tag.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it right on the head. I think right now, especially with like the digital media, is just trying to connect the audience and build a community. And I think that is just so much, because like if you're not in the comic shops every single Wednesday, how are you building that community? And I love how the approach you're taking about this, because you really want to make it not so much like of a transaction. You really want to build something up here. And I really think that what you're doing is truly establishing that, because that's something we need in comics and just in all social media, I would say personally. Like you really want to build.
Yeah, they have this really cool tool that they introduced to us. To your point exactly, is that they said, well, we have this thing called the reservation funnel. And we're like, okay, that's an interesting name, a reservation funnel. But what it is that if people would sign up early on the campaign, it's one thing if you put your email in, and we did all sorts of really cool things where we did like badge ribbons and other things. So if you put in your email in the campaign, we would give you free stuff at Comic-Con. But with this reservation funnel, if you actually, before the campaign's launched, months before it's launched, if you actually put down a small reservation, you get all this bonus stuff at the end of the campaign. So, and we're doing these digital versions. We've got these special exclusive pins. We were creating these amazing, like really cool enamel pins that we're doing for our fans. And they do stuff. They have NFC the interaction with it. So you can have this DM with the devil and talk to our characters, all because you bought, this one thing. So by doing this reservation funnel, people are not just putting in their email. They're saying, I love Danny. I love the story. I'm going to back the campaign. It's not live yet, but I'm in. And we've already seen, I think, a fifth of our campaign has already gone through the reservation funnel. And through BackerKit's numbers, they say instead of like 3 or 5 or 7% conversion when someone signs up and they're like, oh yeah, that campaign, I forgot about that, I'm going to sign up. They have like an 80-90% conversion. And again, not to sound salesy, but that's like for us as creators, we know that if they're already on board with the story and they've got that early sign up and they've put down their first $1 or $5, doesn't really matter. Those people are more likely going to follow us on that campaign because they show that they're committed. And we love that, because now we can give them extra stuff for joining us early. And we can look at our numbers and say, hey, we really are building that community early, and we can see how those numbers are helping us.
Like I say, this is why everybody really should rally around what you're building here with Year of the Devil, because it is really establishing the community aspect. So like we said, we can't sing enough praises about this. But before we let you go, we do have some fun questions to ask. And obviously for both of you, this is a book that obviously a celebrity is coming into the comic world. Outside of Year of the Devil, what has been your favorite celebrity crossover into the comic world?
I mean, Keanu would be the easy low-hanging fruit, because obviously that kind of set the benchmark for everything.
I mean, the easiest one for you, Keith. Come on now. You have one already. I was going to say, like, you kind of have an answer in front, like literally behind you.
I can't say my own stuff.
Absolutely.
Sure.
I mean, the only one you couldn't say was Year of the Devil, but if you wanted to take the easy one, you could say it.
Well, I will tell you that it was interesting when we were doing Carnival of Souls and we did a tour. We did 12 cities last year. We had 2 million people on our tour. We headlined Midsummer Scream and LA Comic-Con, and we created a 26,000 square foot pop-up event in the middle of the concourse hall in the LA Convention Center just to celebrate this children's book that we're doing. And as we're setting this up, Keith David comes out and narrates the book live, sits down all the fans at like, crisscross applesauce. They're all sitting down, and he just comes out and just narrates the whole book. And it was just like magical. It wasn't announced. It was like kind of a flash mob. And then David Desmalchin comes through, and he's just coming through because he's a friend and a fan and loves this giant vaudevillian circus that we created with this meet and greet with the Mr. Float's meat packing company and all these different things. And he's like, just like Danny goes, I want to narrate this. And he does the B-side of the album now. So for us, like that kind of connection of someone who is immensely talented and has their celebrity and their own fan base and saying, we want to collaborate, to me, that's just magical.
I think
Right.
for me to go back to the horror point, I have to show my fandom for a metal group who does horror songs called Ice Nine Kills. So Spencer from Ice Nine Kills, he has his own comic book line that's inspired by his Silver Screen books, and just to see how much he loves the horror community and the horror genre and how he just does it, it's we're taking notes and we're trying to learn as much as we can, just because he appreciates it so much and really wants to give back to the horror and metal community. So if I had to give someone that's not Danny, I'd probably have to give my dead roses to Spencer, if it were.
Right on.
There you go. All right. So let's say that contracts aren't an issue. Let's say that you can get any IP you want. This is a complete fantasy and dream booking. What other universe would you cross over Diego in, and why?
Yeah, I already have an idea for one. So
Okay,
Yeah,
let's hear
go for it. Yeah, start it off.
I put him in Battle Beast in the Invincible universe, but
Okay.
specifically with Battle Beast.
I will tell you that I have had on social media, we have had hundreds, and I'm not kidding, not tens or dozens, hundreds of requests of Machete in space. And I'm just saying, if Machete's not going forward and he's got the Mahui, which is basically the Aztec machete, Diego is definitely needs to get out into the upper atmosphere. So that's our next sequel. I'm saying it right here live.
There you go. I think for me, given the nature of it, I would probably love to see Spawn or something in the McFarlane stuff. I just feel like that's kind of ripe, especially with all our artists. It just feels like a good fit, kind of that 90s grungy metal kind of, I don't know, some either Spawn or like The Crow or, something along those lines, I would say, but definitely a McFarlane feel.
Yeah, Danny has a really great Gen X audience. And I think one of the things that we're going to probably connect with in the next month or two with all the conventions is that Danny's so beloved by this whole generation of people who grew up without social media, without a lot of the more recent sort of developments in the community. And I think that younger generations experienced him through not just Machete, but like Spy Kids and other series when they were kids. So I think they grew up with Danny with a kind of a different sort of, they didn't have maybe Dusk Till Dawn or other things. I showed Dusk Till Dawn to my kids and they were like, what is this? And so it's kind of a cool, like generational, I think he bridges a lot of different generations. So I'm hoping that maybe a lot of the Gen X guys that don't even know what crowdfunding is, can join in as well. And from the metrics we've been seeing, the majority of the audience are all new people that just love Danny that haven't actually backed something before.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
That's a great stat to have there, because that means the people have an interest, and then that brings them into the fold, not just for that, but for future projects as well and other things, because it's a great space.
So one last question for you. Obviously, Year of the Devil is going to be somebody's favorite horror story when it comes out on September 29th. Make sure to support the campaign. But what is your personal favorite horror stories for both of you?
I mean, for me, I always vacillate between The Thing or The Fly. Like, those are always going to be those inspired me to no end. But again, that's the very obvious answer, just because I'm a 90s kid. I mean, I can't say 90s kid anymore, but you know what I mean.
You can. I allow it.
If I had to give a different answer, because I think I may have said that the last time, but just if I had to give a different one, it'd probably be Blade. I remember to this day, that was like the first R-rated movie I saw as a young adult in the theaters, and just the blood, the blood rave,
bloodbath. Yeah.
I would have to say, if I'm not going to give those two other ones, I'd say Blade.
Yeah, I grew up in a very similar sort of influence. Alien was the film that just completely broke me because I had seen Star Wars as a kid. So I convinced my parents to let me see Alien. And that was in the days where, you know, now you have these theater complexes where there's 6 theaters where there used to be 2. And that's how big the screens were. So to see Alien when I was a kid in one of those giant, like 70 millimeter things, it's like bigger than even what they're showing the Odyssey now. You know, it was just a massive screen. And so I was so ill-equipped, I think, emotionally to deal with a movie that I think still holds up now. Those performances and that level of intense horror really scarred me in a good way, I guess. But there was that era coming off the 70s with The Shining, and then into the 80s with The Thing, like Chris said. So those are the films that I think that, even though you can see those older films might not stand up. I mean, I think all those films do stand up, but you kind of look back on some older horror films and you look at them, you're like, okay, well, the visual effects aren't quite there. And you can see the stop motion here, or you can see the puppeting and that kind of stuff. But the psychological horror we were talking about, that sticks with you. And I think that those films were definitely the things that were ingrained in my horror kind of background.
Yeah. And like I said, all of those are great picks. And The Year of the Devil is going to be right up there with it. Folks, we can't recommend this enough. When the book is out on on BackerKit, crowdfunding, you need to support this. See, I get so amped up, I botch the words for it because I'm that excited for it, because I'm signed up for it. I see what's coming out. You need to have this excitement too, because this is a supernatural horror story that you don't want to miss, that brings all the action elements and a great redemption story behind it, all in one spot for you. Keith, Chris, guys, thank you so much for coming on the show. We definitely have to recap after the campaign is over.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for supporting us.
Oh, absolutely. On behalf of Rich and myself, thank you again for checking out another edition of Fanlight Zone Presents. We'll see you next time.